One little spark that set it off was watching this documentary, and it was about a deaf couple. The woman was pregnant and they wanted their baby to be born deaf. And then I kind of thought, yeah, but we all want our kids to display some sort of aspect of ourselves, because in a way there's ego and vanity in having children and creating your own dominion. Families behind closed doors, they have all these rules that other people just say, would find incomprehensible. So all of these ideas started to kind of turn around in my mind. When you're writing at the beginning, I don't even have character names, I just have A, B, C, D, and all these voices, and that is the first scene that you see in the play, is just, partly voices from my family, partly uncles and aunts, cousins, all sorts of people go into that scene. So that was how it kicked off. Well, I met someone who was an interpreter who was hearing. So she was bilingual in sign and English. So she's a child of deaf adults, a coder. And she said, it forces you to grow up really fast when you've got deaf parents, because often the phone rings and it's bad news, someone's died, and you as the 8-year-old are having to break the news to your deaf parents about what's happened. I had a supper once and I invited this guy who was he only signed, and it was fascinating to me to watch the interpreters interpreting for him and saying things in the I form, he would go sign, and she'd say, well, I felt quite annoyed with my parents or whatever. So I thought, God, that's a really interesting theatrical dynamic, someone voicing someone else. So that went straight in the play, of course. I didn't sort of go through life thinking, gosh, the plight of deaf people, because essentially, one is selfish and you don't think about these things until you start to think about them, I always thought that sign language was fascinating, because you see people signing on buses and trains and, and so I was always interested in that. The thing that I wanted to put in the play is this very potent thing where you love someone to bits, and yet you can be slightly cruel to them at moments, and then how hard it can be to say sorry when you know that you've done that is something that's there at the end of the play. So that is partly from here,